The Bitter Lesson, Part 2, First Blood, Chess. Rationalist legs are just like stilts, how unfixed and stolid our feet of wood. Rumi, Masnavi I, 2127. Chapter 3, The Knowledge Engineers. There is a specific kind of pleasure in building a system that resembles you. The chess lab was dim, cluttered, alive with the small sounds of obsession. Keys clicking, pages flipping, printers coughing paper into trays. The walls were covered with diagrams of openings and endgames. Whiteboards carried equations and heuristics that looked Tamara, like the architecture of a mind trying to describe itself. "We're close," a researcher told her with a tight smile. "We're always close." He showed her the evaluation function as if it were a sculpture. Piece activity, king safety, pawn structure, mobility, space, human concepts baked into code, human judgment distilled into numbers. It worked. It improved performance. It produced papers. It also grew heavier. Every time the program failed in a new way, every time it blundered into a trap a child wouldn't fall for, the researchers patched it with more knowledge, another rule, another exception, another carefully crafted feature. The codebase became ornate, beautiful, brittle. The researcher, Mara would remember his hands more than his name, spoke about the program the way a musician speaks about an instrument they have tuned for years. His fingers hovered over the printouts, as if touch alone could transfer the feeling of correctness. "Look," he said, and slid a page across the table. A position, a line of analysis, a mistake the machine used to make, an embarrassing blunder that had become folklore in their group. They had fixed it. They had fixed it by naming it. The fix had a label, something tidy enough to be written in a paper and defended in a hallway conversation. A new term added to the evaluation, a weight adjusted, a special case exception added with a sigh, then justified with a footnote. Mara watched the process and felt the craft in it, the careful way they translated intuition into arithmetic, the way they argued over whether pawn structure should matter more than king safety in the middle game, the way they debated not only what chess is, but what chess ought to reward. They were doing what people do when the world is too large to compute, spending taste as currency. At night, the lab would empty down to a few believers and the steady glow of monitors. The researcher would run game after game in silence. New version against old, this month. This program against last month's, this year's against the ghosts from 3 years ago. Results arrived as rows of numbers that looked objective and behaved like mood. Some mornings he would arrive with a grin that didn't quite hold. "It's up," he'd say, as if announcing a patient's vitals. A little. Up meant a handful of points against the benchmark suite. Up meant one more curve on one more plot that could be shown in one more talk. Up meant life, in a field where life was measured in improvements. Then, inevitably, down. The machine would find a new way to fail. Not randomly, precisely. It would walk into a trap a human grandmaster would never touch. It would miss a long-term plan every human felt in their bones. It would do something that made the researchers stare at the screen with the particular expression of people watching a child repeat a mistake they've corrected 100 times. And then the cycle would begin again. Find the failure mode, name it, add a term, publish, repeat. The work had the satisfaction of handwriting. You could point at a line of code and say, "That is me. That is my idea made operational." It also had a cost. Every new idea became another dependency. Every new dependency became another way the system could collapse under its own cleverness. Over years, the evaluation function grew into a kind of moral document. It encoded what the researchers respected: initiative, restraint, safety, the right kind of sacrifice. Chess as they understood it. Chess as they wanted it to be. At conferences, the knowledge engineers spoke with weary pride. Their progress was incremental. They celebrated half-percentage improvements. They learned to be grateful for small steps. The rooms where they presented were always too cold. Projectors hummed. Slide decks marched forward with clean tables and small gains. Applause came politely. Then, in the hallways, the questions that mattered arrived wearing technical faces. How did it score? How did it do against the standard opponents? How many points did it gain? The scoreboard didn't have to be on a screen to be in the air. Mara recognized the plateau before anyone named it. She could see it in the graphs, in the tone of the hallway conversations. in the way. Researchers began to talk about diminishing returns, like it was a seasonal illness. The plateau had a particular cruelty. You could still be busy. You could still be smart. You could still publish. But the work stopped feeling like a ladder and started feeling like a treadmill. Motion without altitude. In a coffee line, she overheard someone scoff at a rival approach. "Brute force," the person said. "That's not intelligence." Mara turned and looked at him. He was not arrogant. He was sincere. He wanted the world to reward understanding. He wanted intelligence to be something you could respect, not merely something that could beat you. That desire was deeply human. It was also, Mara suspected, strategically irrelevant, because somewhere else, outside this lab, outside these conferences, a different kind of work was happening. Not the work of encoding human insight, but the work of making the machine care about nothing except outcome. Search at scale, hardware at scale, computation leveraged as a weapon. The knowledge engineers were building a mind in the image of their taste. The furnace builders were building something uglier, and perhaps more powerful, a method that did not need taste at all. Mara left the lab one night and walked through empty streets. Streetlights pooled on wet pavement. She thought of chess as a world with fixed rules and still, even there, complexity that resisted human mastery. If a fixed world could not be captured cleanly by human knowledge, what hope did they have with the real world? The plateau pressed down like a hand on the chest, and the field kept breathing anyway, because the next paper was due, because the next grant cycle was coming, because being close was still a way to remain employed. Chapter 4. Building Blue. The machine room had the feeling of a bunker. Cold air poured from vents. Fans screamed. The floor vibrated with the constant exertion of hardware doing what hardware did best, repetition without fatigue. Racks rose like black pillars. LEDs blinked in patterns that meant nothing to humans, and everything to the systems inside. Heat and cold fought an endless war, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and warm plastic. An engineer escorted Mara through the room like a priest showing a visitor the sanctum. "It's not clever," he said, almost defensively. "It's just relentless." He wore a badge with a color stripe Mara didn't have. Every door required a swipe. Every hallway had a camera. The place was less like a university lab and more like a secure facility built for secrets. In a small conference room, a PR handler briefed them before the tour, voice smooth and rehearsed. "We're not building a mind," the handler said. "We're building a system. Don't anthropomorphize it." Then, after a pause, as if remembering the audience, they added, "But yes, it's extraordinary. Relentless." That word belonged to machines. Humans were passionate, stubborn, brilliant, petty. Machines were relentless. Across an ocean, Garry Kasparov prepared as if he were defending a border. He was not only a champion, he was a symbol. Chess had been a human pinnacle for centuries, proof that the mind could dominate a complex world through insight. To lose to a machine would be a personal humiliation and a cultural injury. In interviews, Kasparov performed confidence the way champions do. He smiled at jokes. He spoke of respect. He spoke of preparation. He made the match sound like a test he expected to pass. Inside, he carried pressure like a second spine. The first match did not break the world. It cracked it. The machine won a game. The champion adjusted. The machine lost again. The match ended with Kasparov still standing. The public exhaled. The story remained intact, human genius above mechanical calculation. But the machine room did not exhale. Engineers returned to the furnace and made it bigger. They doubled speed. They refined evaluation. They expanded the opening book. They tuned search. Not to make it human, but to make it stronger. The rematch approached with the inevitability of weather. Mara watched the media framing with fascination and dread. The headlines wanted myth, man versus machine. The brain's last stand, the future at a chessboard. In private, the engineers wanted something simpler, a win. In the middle of a game, the machine played a move that did not look like a machine move. It was not tactical violence. It was long-term patience. Kasparov stared as if the board had become a mirror and shown him something he did not want to see. It was game 2, and the room around the board had the brittle energy of a courtroom. Kasparov could feel the cameras leaning in. He could feel IBM's brand hanging in the air like perfume you couldn't wash off. He had set the trap the way grandmasters set traps, not with greed, but with calculation. A poisoned pawn, a baited line, a position that, in human chess culture, implied a certain kind of response, an obvious bite, an obvious punishment, a story that unfolded inside familiar syntax. He had done this before, against humans, hundreds of times. You invite the opponent to be themselves, and then you punish them for it. Deep Blue did not bite like a human. For a long moment, the machine side of the table remained dead still. No eyes, no breath, no face to betray doubt, only the clock's digital pulse. Kasparov watched the seconds tick down and tried to make his own breathing look ordinary. The move arrived, move 36. It was not the move any grandmaster would have played in that position. Not because it was illegal, but because it was wrong in the human way. It stepped away from the immediate tactic, away from the local skirmish, into something that looked like long-term strategy. Positional patience. The kind of move people used to say computers could not understand because computers had no sense of later. Kasparov felt his stomach drop. For a heartbeat, he tried to interpret it as error. That was the reflex. If the machine did something you didn't predict, you first assume it made a mistake. The universe wants that to be true. Then he saw the line. Or rather, he saw the outline of a line, a shadow of inevitability that stretched beyond his own horizon of calculation. The move didn't refute his trap in a single flashy sequence. It dissolved it. It made the trap irrelevant by refusing to enter the story Kasparov had written for it. Kasparov's throat tightened. He realized, too late, that his confidence had been built on a theory of the opponent. Not a theory of chess, a theory of the machine, and the theory was failing. In the press seats, people shifted. A commentator chuckled nervously into a microphone, as if laughter could domesticate the wrongness. Kasparov looked up toward the glass. Behind a window, IBM staff stood in silhouette, shoulders close, faces turned away from the board toward their monitors. It looked, suddenly, less like a match and more like a control room. Less like sport and more like operations. Kasparov's mind reached for the oldest human comfort in the face of opacity. Someone is helping it. He had no evidence. He had only the sensation of being outmaneuvered by something that shouldn't be able to outmaneuver him in this particular way. He played on. He had to. Champions don't get to pause the world. But the thought stayed, hot and humiliating. If the machine could do this, if it could step outside the human script, then what else could it do that he was not prepared to imagine? When the game ended, Kasparov's face held a composure so tight it looked like pain. Off camera, he asked questions that weren't chess questions. Who touched the system? Who had access to the logs? Who was in the room when the move was chosen? IBM answered with corporate calm. Smiles, reassurance, language polished until it became frictionless. Kasparov heard the reassurance and felt something colder than anger settle in him. The certainty that this match had moved beyond the board. Mara felt the moment through the field's collective hush. People described it in hallways with the tone reserved for religious experiences and accidents. It played, strategically, someone said, as if the word itself were obscene. Kasparov's suspicion rose. Paranoia is a natural response when the world violates your model of what is possible. He began to believe the machine was being helped, that humans were whispering behind the glass, that the opponent had become not a computer but a conspiracy. Mara watched the same suspicion spread through the community like a contagion. It wasn't only Kasparov. It was everyone who needed an explanation that preserved the old hierarchy. In a late-night bar conversation at a conference, someone leaned in close and said, "With the hot certainty of rumor, they won't release the logs." "Why would they?" someone else asked. "Because," the first said, eyes bright, "there's something in them." Mara felt her stomach drop. She didn't know whether the rumor was true. She only knew it was believable because opacity had always been the easiest kind of power, and because the furnace, by its nature, was not designed to be understood. It was designed to win. Mara understood the impulse. Conspiracies are comforting. They preserve dignity. If you lost because you were cheated, then you did not lose to the thing you feared. And if you didn't lose to the thing you feared, you can keep believing. You're still the kind of person the future has to negotiate with. But the furnace did not need a conspiracy. The furnace needed compute. And compute was arriving.